Effectively, what we're talking about is a new form of currency that's passed the test of not being a fad, but it's not a Ponzi scheme. Because a Ponzi scheme is when people pay money into an investment when the money's not really invested. It's the money's just being circulated back out to pay returns to original investors, and eventually the whole system collapses. That's a Ponzi scheme. Bitcoin is actually a currency. You're buying a currency which has some inherent value and has a finite amount. Why people like it is because unlike paper money you can keep on printing, there's only a limited amount of them, so it stops the inflation effect of it, which means it's going to put upward pressure on the price of it. So what will happen, who knows? But what we're looking at is possibly, you jot this down, your trend is a friend. And you've got to understand that you have now been made aware of probably the greatest investment return opportunity that's ever occurred in the history of humanity. Is that exciting? And you've only just found out about it in recent weeks, is that true? Or when I started talking about it, okay? Is that the reality is that's what you've seen. Now, does that mean it's going to be a great investment moving forward? Does that mean there's something that you should invest in? Well, let's look at some of those things in a moment. But what I'm saying, if something's gone from 10,000 investment to $240 million, am I fairly accurate in saying that's probably been the best investment in the history of humanity? Yes or no? Absolutely. It'd be hard to beat that into something that's not necessarily a bubble or not a tulip boom. It's not a dot-com company that's going to implode that's not really making anything. Something that actually has intrinsic value. Some people say, well, it's not like gold. I mean, gold at least you have something physical, or you have a piece of metal. Do you know what I'm saying? What value does gold have other than the value that we perceive or give to it, other than the trust we place in gold? One of the reasons Bitcoin took off, remember there was a Cyprus banking crash earlier this year, I think in April, remember that? And what happened is that what freaked people out, because gold has risen. I told people to buy gold at $200 an ounce a decade ago. It went all the way up to $1,900 an ounce. Now where is it? I think it's even dropped down lower, hasn't it? To my knowledge, it's below. Guess what? Bitcoin, as of yesterday, overtook gold. I think gold is down about 1,200 or something. So Bitcoin's already overtaken it in value. See, what happened in Cyprus is that when the banks collapsed, they shut the banks. Imagine this happened, so shut your banks so you can't get your money. Then they said, well, we're going to reopen them, but we're going to take 30% of what was in your bank account. And imagine how people freaked out about that. But what they did to bail out Cyprus, the European Union said you have to sell, I think it was 400 billion or X amount of gold that Cyprus had. So Cyprus had to sell their gold. Now that's not enough to flood the gold market, but what it is enough to go, hang on a minute, if some of these other countries like Spain or other Italy and Greece collapse, or need a bailout, they're going to be forced to sell their gold. So all of a sudden, normally when there's a banking crisis, what will happen to gold prices? They'll normally shoot up, but guess what happened to them? It went down. So all of a sudden, gold lost its safe haven status. When it should have went up, it actually went down, because if these countries need bailouts, they have to sell their gold, it floods the market, and gold will go down. Okay, because gold's not necessarily rare. Did you realize? Gold's not necessarily rare. It would go down. So George Soros come out and said gold is no longer a safe haven. And when people like him say that, it supports a lot of evidence. Now, I'm not saying gold will have no long-term inherent value. But I'm saying the $35,000 extra worth of gold I bought 2 years ago, as an example, I sold last week for $23,000. If that $35,000 had been invested as a hedge, not into gold, but into Bitcoin 2 years ago, then that would be about $4.5 million. So if we're investing just purely as a hedge, what's a better hedge, $4.5 million or $23,000? That's the difference in gold to Bitcoin in the last 2 years. Who's following what I'm saying here? So by now, it should be getting you excited. Now, what does that mean for the future, though? Well, let's look at what's happened. And obviously, hindsight gives us a lot extra value. I told people to start buying Bitcoin at $120. It's now $1,200. So it's had a tenfold increase since then. But let's go back in time. Let's say when it was 1 cent. And then it went to 10 cents. So it's gone times 10. Then it went from 10 cents up to $1, true? There was another times 10 multiple. And then it went from $1 to $10. So you could have bought Bitcoin a year ago for around $10. $10,000 invested in Bitcoin a year ago is now worth pretty close to $1 million. Who had $10,000 available to invest a year ago? If you had bought Bitcoin, you'd have $1 million today. You would have had to been aware of something. I started writing a book a year ago, and then I sort of took a while, and I had my researcher doing the research on it. I said, I've been reading about this Bitcoin thing. I want to write a book, even though it's not something I normally would write about, but I'm studying, I've studied and had an interest in the history of money and the evolution of that and the Federal Reserve and what's going to happen. So I wanted to write it from that angle. And then I thought, maybe people won't be interested in Bitcoin. So the book took, to a couple of months ago before I released it. You probably would appreciate if I had released it a year ago, okay? You mean like, well, maybe I should get onto this thing. But here's what will happen. Most people aren't trained to act. They're not trained to act. So the challenge is, even though right now it's becoming in mainstream media, not the average person on the street probably hasn't quite heard about Bitcoin or only heard a little bit about it, even though it's been one of the most phenomenal investment returns in the history of the planet, what do most people do about Bitcoin? Nothing. Because they're too busy making a living. There's a saying, apart from forget to live, most people are too busy working to get rich. True? Most people are too busy working to get rich. They're too busy to the grindstone and go, hang on a minute, maybe I should do a Nathan Tinkler and go and make $1 billion out of the mining industry. Or maybe I've heard about this thing called Bitcoin, I should check it out, I should at least act upon it. Okay? Most people just simply don't act and they go, well, if only. Okay? Or same with property. I wish I'd bought those properties 10, 20 years ago. Well, I did. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I got myself to act. Yes, of course, I wish I'd bought Bitcoin back in these days. But a year ago, you could have still bought it here. So Bitcoin then went to $100. So another times 10 multiple. So now even as a year ago, a month ago, Bitcoin was around $120. So a month ago, $10,000 into Bitcoin would now be worth how much? $100,000. Okay? So what you're seeing is that even in that last month, so when Bitcoin really start getting picked up on the financial news networks around the world, and that's why Sky News Tomorrow is running a lot on it, because it's becoming so popular, is 3 weeks ago, there was US Senate hearings about Bitcoin and about these currencies, and the US Senate said it is a legitimate form of currency. Ben Bernanke of the US Federal Reserve said some quite positive comments about it, that he thought, if it does become an alternate currency, it will probably be a good thing for the world. Okay, so even the feds, etc., weren't like, because a lot of people like, the central bankers will try and destroy this, okay? There has been a few dirty tricks. Citibank, there was a report released on Bitcoin about a week ago that was basically defaming it, saying the guy behind Bitcoin is friends with the guy behind Silk Road, and then maybe he was funding Silk Road, and then it was on CNN or something, and then they had to put a retraction, is that report was funded by a grant by Citibank, and a few days later Citibank had the report pulled, okay? It was basically to see who's funding the reports. It was basically a way of Citibank trying to defame or create volatility. You mightn't want to defame it for any other reason, to create volatility, go in and buy a shitload of it and then it goes back up. So this is the stuff that goes on in Wall Street and the markets, so you've got to be aware of those sort of things. So what happened the last 3 weeks, the mainstream media is starting to pick up on it. And because went from 100 to 350, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, people saying it's not going to go high, it's going to bobble, it's going to drop down, 900, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,250. Where will it go to? The Winklevoss, there's a Bitcoin industry that's booming, it's the fastest growing industry on the planet right now. It's, ATM machines are starting, exchanges are starting. We're launching an exchange next week in Australia so people can trade and buy, through one of our exchanges, Bitcoin. There's big conferences. We'll be holding a summit early next year in Australia as well, but there's a lot of conferences going around the world because such a demand of people wanting to know what is Bitcoin, how do you make money from it, what's the ups and downs of it, what should we do? And so it's becoming quite interesting. Winklevoss brothers, you were speaking at a conference recently, and they're very bullish on Bitcoin. And they, this is only a couple of months ago, basically said that we believe Bitcoin will go to $10,000. They were literally laughed at and mocked. But now all the mainstream media is going, well, maybe their prediction is now more realistic. It's hit 1,200. It went from 100 to 1,200. 10,000 now seems more realistic. My predictions are, I believe it's possible, jot this down, it's more than possible. No one knows that Bitcoin could reach as much as $100,000 within 2 years. Now, that's a pretty big prediction. But let's look at the fundamentals behind why myself and some others are saying it's possible to do that. No one knows, but this is what we'd look at. Certainly, if it's possible to go to 100,000 in 2 years, is 10,000 becoming certainly a greater degree of certainty, yes or no? Yeah, so if you bought it 1,000 or whatever, and it goes to 10,000, well then you've got that multiple of 10 again. There's some people predicting as much as $1 million in the future for Bitcoin. Where are these predictions coming from? No one knows, there's no guarantee. It could go from 1,000 or 1,200 is now, it could go to 0, is that true? Yes. Something could happen where it gets hacked or the system implodes. Unlikely, because there's so many people involved now and so many people have a vested interest in Bitcoin or have a commitment to it, but it could go to 0. But if you're an investor and go, okay, it's possible it could go to 10,000, possibly 100,000, that's the upside. If 100,000 was the upside, 1,000 to get in, your upside is huge, your downside is minimal. 1,000 to 0 versus 1,000 to 100,000. Who's following what I'm saying here? If you had that degree of certainty, you could go, oh shit, $1,000, $10,000, I can afford to lose that. I'm happy to take a bet for a longer term view that down the track it could be worth 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. Making sense? Now, the challenge with most people, they'll try and get rich quick. So they'll try and take a short term thing. Any of my things that I think about are longer term fundamentals. So you don't want to, some people, have got rich quick. But mainly those people that have is because they've had a longer term view, or others have just become accidental millionaires. The people that become millionaires so far are mainly accidental. They just mucked around mining a bit and ended up becoming millionaires and didn't really know, but they did get in ahead of a trend. They did get in ahead of what is a potential revolution of the monetary system. So there's a lot more to it than just some gimmick or some fad. There is a lot of fundamental reasons why Bitcoin can become a huge industry. Right now, there's about 11.9 million Bitcoins in circulation. That can go up to how many? What's the maximum? 21 million. And that will take to when? When are they expecting it to reach 21 million? 2140. Yeah, there's a few different, 2140 I believe it is. It simply means it'll take that long in the system, because the more they mine, the harder their logarithms get, the more it takes. Now, you might say, I want to go and mine Bitcoin. Well, in your garage, you probably missed that opportunity. You can still mine it, but now the logarithms are getting more and more complex, and plus how many other people now are jumping into the mining bandwagon, and you have to pool and network computers together to get them. But they're worth a lot more, so it might take a lot more to get them, but I guess they're worth a lot more. And if you go, well, they're going to be worth 100,000 one day, was definitely worth mining them, okay? But you'll probably need to be a part of a pooled network or buy proper computer mining equipment, where in the early days, it was a little bit simpler, anyone could have done it, but they're only worth a few cents, so you're like, well, it's not really worth much, but they are now. So what you've got to look at here is, if you looked at an industry or a stock market cap, etc., if you start to apply that analogy to it, if right now, if it's worth, say, just $1,000, round figures, what is the total market cap of Bitcoin? Market cap means the total, if you're in the stock market, BHP might be trading at, say, $100, the round figures. And there's 10 million shares. The market cap of BHP would be 10 million shares times $100. That would be the total market cap of the company, Making sense? So the total market cap of the Bitcoin, all the Bitcoins in circulation, if there's 11.9 million of them, times they're trading at, say, $1,000 each, equals how much? 11.9 billion? Is that right? So for them to hit $10,000 would be times 10, say. So a market cap times 10 would be how much? 119 billion thereabouts. The market cap of Facebook is how much? It's about $120 billion. It might be a bit more now. Does it make sense? So just one company has a market cap of the total market cap of Bitcoin if it went to $10,000. Raise your hand and you start to see that 10,000 is now much more realistic, much more probable if you understand market caps. Actually, it's becoming a fairly good bet. Doesn't mean it might be volatile in that time, yes, or doesn't mean it could get there in one hell of a hurry. What you're going to understand is that every day that goes by, the amount of people finding out about Bitcoin that want to get Bitcoin. Think about in this world as a hedge, knowing that gold has lost some of its hedge and safe haven status. Investors, and here's what some of the analysts are coming out in mainstream media and saying, it's a speculative investment, true. Therefore, you shouldn't put any more than 1% of your portfolio into Bitcoin. What they're really basically saying is if people went and put 1% of their portfolio in Bitcoin, what prices are going to hit in a hurry? Imagine companies that have billions of dollars in cash reserves. Imagine Warren Buffett, insurance companies, etc. You imagine the investors in the world. Do you think right now they're not going, get me some of that Bitcoin? Just as a hedge, just get at least 1% or 0.5% of portfolio, get it into Bitcoin just in case it goes to 10,000 or goes to 100,000, or just in case there is a banking failure, we need to be hedged and have some money outside the banking system. Who's following what I'm saying here? So is $120 billion in the space of all the money that exists in the world, is that a lot of money or is that like a super tiny speck? Like it's one grain of sand on a beach. That's what it is. It's a tiny speck. That's if it hits 10,000. If people just go, how many people in Australia alone would go, you know what? It's worth a hedge in case there is a banking system collapse. Or it's worth a bet in case it does go up. I can afford to lose $1,000. I can afford to lose 10,000. I'll take a hedge. I'll take a bet. Is there a lot of people that could do that? A lot of people with a lot more money would do that. So the potential upside, I think, in my judgment, is fairly huge.